part of the world. And it was written by one that how quickly the education, how quickly the morals had spread, how quickly the religious fervor had spread to this part of the world, how different it was, and that we were but a fading memory, we the Haudenosaunee. Well, we're still here. We're still here. We're still here very strong. When the people came to this place here called Canandaigua, it was a very small town. And the people walked, the people traveled by canoe, and they came whatever way they could to this town to make a treaty of peace with a really brand new government, with a George Washington at the head of it. And they knew what had happened to them. What had happened was land speculators were selling our land right out from under us. People were coming into our territories and hunting us like so many deer. They were taking the lives of our people, and we had no recourse for how we're going to deal with this kind of criminal behavior. And so we had begun in the 1790s to address George Washington in Philadelphia about the necessity of a treaty of peace to end the war, the Revolutionary War for us. The Treaty of 1783 that ended it for the British and the Americans, it made no mention of us. We were not even included in that treaty as participants. So we began to realize we needed a treaty. By 1784, the kind of treaty we got was not a good treaty. It was a treaty to take more of our land, the so-called Treaty of Fort Stanwix. Big land grab. It was signed by our warriors, even though they were instructed just to listen. But they did sign some things. Now, around 1792, there were efforts made to bring together some kind of a gathering to reach a peace and friendship. And it culminated here in 1794 with the Canandaigua Treaty. And many promises are made within that treaty. One of the promises made is that we will be free to use our land undisturbed, and that we will have the free use and enjoyment of our territories, and it described those territories of the Onondaga, the Seneca people, and of the Cayuga people. And it mentioned that the others of the Six Nations had that same right. And there was a recognition of our sovereignty at that time, that the only way that our lands could be taken from us further was if we agreed to it, if we agreed to sell it. Well, we've had violations. We've had many violations of that agreement that have taken place, beginning in the 1960s, even before that in the 1950s. Perhaps in the 1940s, the plans were laid for the Kinzua Dam, for the Niagara Power Project, for the St. Lawrence Seaway, all these different things that took pieces of our land. These things really happened, and they have affected our people. And we still commemorate those events that took place. Now, when this treaty was finally reached and an agreement was made, we were going back to the Constitution of 1789, your Constitution, those of you who are U.S. citizens. In that Constitution, it says, treaties are the supreme law of the land. That's what it says in the Constitution. Treaties are the supreme law of the land. It doesn't say treaties with Paris or treaties with England or treaties with some other foreign government. It just says treaties. And certainly the treaties that were being made at that time were being made with us. So if they are the supreme law of the land, and we made a treaty of peace and friendship, and we have the right to the free use and enjoyment of our land, then it is dependent upon us to come here every year and remind this federal government that we still believe that treaty is in place. And that's the reason why we are standing here before you, and that is the reason why we thank each and every one of you for coming and joining with us. Now, in 1792, there was an agreement, an accord that was reached. And during that accord, there was an agreement to give $1,500 to our people for things that they needed. You know, whether it was clothing, whether it was farm implements, whatever it may have been, the federal government was going to give this to us. At the Treaty of Canandaigua, an amount of $3,000 was added to that. So $4,500 was added by one of the articles of the Canandaigua Treaty, so that annually treaty cloth would be distributed to us. This is a piece of treaty cloth that I'm holding in my hand. It's also referred to as annuity cloth. Comes annually. Now, there was some confusion because I've had people ask me, is the federal government going to bring your treaty cloth today? They don't bring it to us. They ship it to us. And the Army Corps of Engineers takes responsibility for shipping that to us. so that it arrives to our clerk's office, and then we can go down to the clerk's office, and then it's distributed to us on about 1.25 yard basis. That's what we get out of this cloth. It's a muslin today. At one time it was a calico, but today it's a muslin. This is what we receive. And we find some use for it. If we let it accumulate for a while, we get a larger amount of it at one time. Maybe you can use it for the lining of your curtains or other things like that. People find a way to use it. Now, in 1954, the federal government came to our people and they said, what we'd like to do is give you one lump sum and wipe out that annual, the necessity of giving you this annually. And we said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to leave it upon you as a responsibility to ship us this cloth annually and to remind yourselves that this treaty is still in place. Even by that simple act, you can remind yourself that the treaty is still in place. So, this comes to us still, comes to each of our 6 nations. All of those, not those living in Canada, but those living with what they call the United States. Within the United States, we received this treaty cloth. And I just want to mention that that is an ongoing thing. It's still present today. And what we're about here today, I want to say one more thing about that. What we're about here today was brought up in 1794. That when we come together periodically, it is to polish the rust on the chain of friendship between our people. When this treaty was made, it was based back on this original wampum belt. This belt that we refer to simply as the Gaswenta, the Turo. This simply says that we here, Haudenosaunee people, we're traveling in our canoe. We're traveling forward in the river, down the river of life. We're going forward into the future, and with us here is our language, is our Ungwe Onweka, our way of life. Here with us is our Gayanashagawa, our great law. Here with us is the Gaiwio, the words that were given to us about how we are to be as human beings, the knowledge of plants and trees and animals and everything we need. It's right here in this canoe with us. And traveling next to us are our younger brothers that came from across the ocean, and they're in a ship. And in their ship, they have their language, they have their law, they have their everything they need, medicine, whatever it may be, it's with them there. And we can live, there's 3 beads here in the center, we can live in peace and friendship forever, so long as we recognize the right of each to exist. And we don't want you to jump out of your ship and try to steer our canoe for us. And we're not going to try to jump out of our canoe and steer your ship for you. That was the agreement. And so when we bring out this silver covenant chain, what we're doing is we're saying that these 3, this peace and friendship forever, we're renewing that. We're polishing it up so that the federal government and the representatives of it coming here, we hope that they'll take this message back to their leadership. We have another 4 years with this president that's just been elected. And we've been trying to get a meeting with him. We've had some meetings, but they really haven't been the kind of meeting we need. Because it says very clearly in this treaty, whenever we have cause of concern, we're to take it to the executive branch. We're to take it to the President of the United States. Not to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, not to the Congress. We are not the wards of the Congress. Despite what the Congress may think, we are not the wards of the Congress. So I'd like to ask my chief here, Sam George from the Cayuga Nation, if you'd take hold of one end of that, and ask my friend here. He's a Representative Tom Reed, House Representative member who was just re-elected. And they're polishing this chain of friendship again. They're joining together. So hold it up there, gentlemen, so they can see what you're doing. They're linked together by this chain of peace and friendship forever, so long as we can respect the right of each to exist. And we don't try to make you into us, and you don't try to make us into you. Because we are here dedicated to our future for our children. And so this is part of what we're here for today, is this commemoration and this making of this friendship that was made here over 218 years ago on this very site, in this town, in this city of Canandaigua, New York. Now there are many people here
from the Wampanoag Nation from Cape Cod. So if you could join me in welcoming them today as well. So on behalf of Congressman Reed and the federal government, again, it's my pleasure to be here to recognize the 218th year of the signing of the Treaty of Canandaigua, and the unbroken chain that that represents, and the sovereignty, the recognition of the United States government of the sovereignty of the Six Nations. This is also, of course, the 94th year since the end of World War I. First known as Armistice Day, Decoration Day, and now we know it as Veterans Day. So I'd like to recognize those audience members who are veterans and who have served the United States government, but I would also like to have a double recognition for any of those members of the Six Nations who have also served in the United States Armed Forces. So if you could join me in recognizing our veterans and Six Nation veterans. Representative Reed, newly elected to the 23rd Congressional District, now for the first time in many years, both reservations of the Seneca Nation, both the Cattaraugus Reservation and the Allegheny Reservation, are within one congressional district. Representative Reed has had a close working relationship with President Porter of the Seneca Nation for the past 2 years, and looks forward to working with President Snyder, who was recently elected as president. And with that, I'd like to just add one additional point, and that is that Representative Reed has made a pledge over the past 2 years, and he wanted me to express this going forward, that as the United States Congressman for this area, he pledges to work with the Six Nations and any issues they may have, whether it be with the federal government, with state or local governments, and to be that liaison between the nation and the government if they so choose. And just as an aside, I'd like to reference to Peter that the nations have been waiting 4 years to meet with this president. Representative Reed's been waiting 2 years, so maybe if we join forces, maybe Representative Reed and the representatives of the Six Nations can accomplish that worthy goal. Thank you.
Helen, come on up this way, please. During the time period when we met here in Canandaigua to sign the Treaty of Peace, our people were not yet literate. They were not, the majority of them, reading English. And so along with our people gathered here were Quakers who provided interpretation of what was being written in paper. And one of those was William Savory. And so we have a long-standing friendship with the Quakers, and I recognize that one of those from the Quaker Meeting House here in Farmington is with us today, Helen Kirker, who's been here many times since the 200th anniversary and before that. And I'd like Helen just to say a few words on behalf of the Friends.
My name is Helen Kirker, and I bring you greetings from your neighbors, the Farmington Friends, known as the Quakers. Our Society of Friends was involved here in Canandaigua in 1794, when the Native Americans and white settlers were each quite leery of each other. Both sides of the treaty negotiations thought that the other side was trying to take advantage of them. This was particularly an issue where the treaty was to be written in English, but where each Native American nation had its own language. The participants needed a neutral party, one that all sides could trust. That mediation role fell to the Society of Friends, who sent a delegation here from its headquarters in Philadelphia, with the Quakers helping to establish a mutual trust. The treaty negotiations were able to proceed on the subjects at hand. William Savory led this Quaker delegation from Philadelphia. The journal that he wrote then contains our most detailed account of what happened here in Canandaigua that summer and autumn of 1794. My own Quaker ancestors were from North Adams, Massachusetts, and joined many of their neighbors to come to Ontario County in 1788 to settle what is now Farmington, New York. Their North Adams neighbors disapproved of that move and read them out of the Quaker meeting. In 1794, however, some of those North Adams neighbors came to Canandaigua as part of the Quaker contingent. While here, they visited their former neighbors in Farmington and saw that they had made a nice, settlement. So all was forgiven, and they were readmitted to the Society of Friends. North Adams, Massachusetts was later the birthplace of another Quaker woman named Susan B. Anthony. Her 1873 trial in this very courthouse was a landmark in the history of women's suffrage. Prior to that trial, Susan traveled throughout Ontario County in an effort to sway public opinion to her cause. Several times she visited Farmington and spoke to her fellow Quakers there. Farmington in the 1830s, 1840s, and 1850s was a hotbed of social ferment. The 1816 Farmington Quaker Meeting House hosted a forum on women's rights in 1838, which declared that all men and women are equal. This was a full 10 years before the more famous Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls. Abolition of slavery was then a leading issue, and many Farmington Quakers assisted slaves in escaping to Canada on the Underground Railroad. Even though assisting the escape of slaves was then illegal, the neighbors were sympathetic and would not tell on those who harbored slaves overnight on their way north to freedom. Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison, and many other famous abolitionists found a receptive audience in the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meeting House.